Hi everybody, Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio here with Michelle Malkin, a syndicated columnist, a senior editor at Conservative Review. There's no way we'd talk to a junior editor. I want everyone to know that right now. The host of Michelle Malkin Investigates on CRTV and a New York Times best-selling author, writing 6 amazing books, including her most recent, Sold Out: How High-Tech Billionaires and Bipartisan Beltway Crapweasels Are Screwing America's Best and Brightest Workers. MichelleMalkin.com and CRTV.com to check out her work, which I strongly urge you to do. Michelle, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Thank you.
Feels kind of like we're in a new age of weaponized accusations of sexual impropriety. Now, for those who are, I guess, have a couple of tree rings under the belt, this sort of reminds me a little bit of the 90s with Bill Clinton and with some of this with Clarence Thomas and so on. And probably because of the absence of alternative media, it didn't metastasize in the way that the Harvey Weinstein scandal has metastasized, to the point where now it's coming out a lot in Hollywood. It's coming out a lot, of course, in Washington, in politics. I think a little bit in the sports world. I think academia is going to be the big one still to come. But it is an amazing and powerful moment to have both an excavation of these kinds of sexual crimes in the world, and also the fear that it is turning a little toxic and that they might have a certain kind of Salem witch trial feeling and aspect to it. What's your view of where we stand in this process?
I think what I'm most worried about now, reflecting on the year's worth of these so-called journalistic investigations, which are essentially proxy political witch hunts, is the idea that you are going to have every last journalist, particularly female journalists now, vying for awards and honors based merely on regurgitating anecdotes of supposed victims, accusers, whose stories are procured. And procured after 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years at convenient points in time in the electoral process. I think it's a huge danger. I think that it borders on journalistic malpractice to cast these so-called investigations as news gathering, when in fact what they are doing is manufacturing narratives. And there's no checks and balance within these newsrooms that are dominated by ideologues and increasingly, Stefan, are being populated by feminist bloggers who are able to just, go through this revolving door and magically, appear at, one end of the Washington Post headquarters as journalists. That revolving door never happens the other way, where you have conservative-leaning journalists, who might have a journalistic interest in debunking false allegations of sexual assault or rape, as I've been doing over the last year, who can then don the mantle of mainstream journalist and do their work and pursue what is clearly, on the part of these left-wing feminist bloggers, an agenda.
It is an agenda, and to a large degree, outside of the Hollywood stuff at the moment, which has taken down some prominent leftists, it is generally focused on conservatives. And one of the things that troubles me, there's an old saying in philosophy that says that which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And accusations of sexual misconduct are so damning to someone's reputation and somebody's personhood that, to me, if you're a reporter, if you do not have corroboration, if you do not have independent evidence, if you do not have any kind of methodology for establishing the he said, she said stuff to any kind of veracity, I'm just not sure that it's even remotely right to publish stuff. I mean, with the Weinstein stuff, it was different. With a lot of the other stuff, there's been multiple witnesses. There are photographs with Al Franken and so on. So I think on those aspects, one can. But the law simply cannot handle disagreements about the content of interactions that cannot be independently verified from 40 years ago. There's no way the legal system can handle that in any way, shape, or form. And it is such a destructive allegation to make that if there are any inconsistencies in the story, there should be a lot of research to find out what's going on. And there just isn't. And this weaponization of accusations is extraordinarily dangerous, I think, because it means we're not discussing ideas, and it also means that genuine allegations are going to get lost in the mix.
Yes, I mean, essentially what you have, it is a weapon. It's a bazooka. And if you put that bazooka in the hands of, pink pussy-hatted adolescents, essentially intellectual adolescents, people are going to get hurt. People are going to lose not just their reputations and their jobs and their careers, but possibly their freedom. And it's not just possibly, because we know that there are, some 2,000 people who have been exonerated since, I believe, 1983. And many of those cases involve false allegations of sexual assault and rape. And you put your finger on it too, Stefan, when you talked about the lack of any kind of methodology in the newsroom. Getting 2 or 3 of an accuser's friends to tell you that, yes, she told us a couple of years ago, and here's an email, does not satisfy my criteria for corroboration. And I think that we would benefit greatly from the wisdom and the experience and the expertise of people who do this for a living, who have to vet false allegations, people who are criminal profilers, people who are behavioral psychiatrists and psychologists. I sat down a couple of months ago with Dr. Brent Turvey, who is a forensic expert and who just wrote an entire textbook on false allegations, not merely of rape, but other crimes ranging from property crimes to Medicaid fraud to racial hoaxes. And there is a clear methodology, at least when you're dealing in the criminal justice system with, for example, establishing a linkage analysis. If you're going to claim that one of these predators has some sort of MO or has a certain proclivities, then you actually have to have some method of establishing that it is a real link and that you're not just asserting it. And so just that alone, if you apply that to the Roy Moore context, it's not clear that one could, make such a valid linkage analysis. But where is the debate in the newsrooms or in these journalistic professional societies about how they go about establishing whether or not these claims are true, and in fact, if these links actually do exist among the half dozen or 12 or 13 or 15 women that are coming forward 40 years after alleged incidents?
And I'm always confused because, to me, a false allegation, I mean, there's a part of me, and it may be kind of Old Testament or old school, but there's a part of me that says if you accuse someone of a crime and it turns out that you were lying, then you should get the sentence of the person you were accusing. So if you accuse someone of rape, then you should get the sentence he was going to get if you turned out to be lying. The lack of negative consequences for people who are misrepresenting what happened, who are proven to be liars, who are proven to have falsified documents, who are proven or who recant or who withdraw their stories and so on. The lack of negative consequences for this, to me, is also particularly chilling because it means, of course, people respond to incentives. And if you can gain attention and notoriety and approval and praise and all of those, you can be on TV, you can be flown all over the place. And if it turns out that what you said is not true, you suffer no negative consequences, that seems to be entirely lopsided in terms of incentives.
Yes, and I think that this is a legacy of Tawana Brawley. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, it was the 30th anniversary of the Tawana Brawley hoax. And look what's happened 30 years later. Sorry,
just for the listener, if you want to go over a few of the details about that, that's well worth it because it's kind of gone down the memory hole for a lot of people.
Yes, she was a teenager who disappeared for 4 days and then suddenly reappeared in a trash bag with racial epithets and the word bitch in charcoal on her own body. and she alleged that she had been gang raped over the course of 4 days by a group of white men, including a local county prosecutor, Steve Pagonis. And this really was the advent of Al Sharpton's career, along with two of his vulture attorney racial demagogue cronies. And the three of them, basically hijacked the entire city. And it was with the enabling liberal media that this hoax was perpetrated for weeks, until a neighbor came forward and said that she had actually seen Tawana Brawley crawling into the trash bag. A grand jury concluded that the entire thing was a hoax. Steve Pagonis, the local county prosecutor, sued, and he was awarded a six-figure settlement, which he has still yet to collect on. Tawana Brawley was never prosecuted for lying about a crime, and as you pointed out, lying about a crime is a serious crime. Didn't even get a slap on the wrist, was able to change her name, and now works as a nurse in Virginia, evading payment of the civil settlement to Steve Pagonis. So if there are no criminal consequences, and you have all of these strong incentives, whether it's the media attention and fame or civil settlements, so many of these women go on to sue their alleged accusers, and it's just a wrong on top of a wrong. So there's no wonder that you can draw a straight line from Tawana Brawley to Duke to the University of Virginia. This is still continuing to happen on college campuses today. And to the extent that any of these young, innocent men are able to prove that they are innocent, they're still not allowed to go back to the schools that they were kicked out of. And they live with that stigma the rest of their lives, while their accusers scoop up awards from social justice associations and get, on Vogue magazine Women of the Year covers.
Well, this is an astounding thing as well, because not only do there not seem to be any negative consequences, the positive consequences are enormous. And it is, to me, also quite fascinating to see the left now particularly squirming under the lack of due process as this happens to take down some of their own stars. And it's like, well, if you weren't sitting there saying that the lack of due process, and even the avoidance of due process, the inability to confront your accuser, the inability to have a lawyer present in these kangaroo courts that happen on campuses, if you weren't concerned about due process there, cry me a river when this inevitable boomerang happens. This is why we want due process, even for our worst enemies. This is why we want free speech for the most egregiously wrong people, because if you surrender that principle sooner or later, even if the only thing you care about is your own well-being, it's going to come back and bite you.
That's exactly right. And so it's noxious when you have a creep enabler like Nancy Pelosi all of a sudden have epiphanies about the preciousness of due process when it's her, pet Democrat pervs who are under fire. I will say that over the last year that I've been covering these cases, and in particular the Daniel Holtzclaw case, that I have been very heartened that there are people on both sides of the ideological spectrum that I've met that are truly principled and committed to guaranteeing due process for men who are falsely convicted and falsely accused. But they are few and far between. And then the length of time that it takes to exonerate a falsely convicted person just adds to the disgrace and the injustice. I mean, the average amount of time to exonerate a falsely convicted person is 11 years. And it's only through pro bono efforts or charitable efforts, nonprofits mostly, that you're able to get proper legal representation. And in fact, there are very few lawyers out there who are prepared to fight these battles and have the wherewithal to see them to the end, to rewrite these tales of injustice.
And of course, the prosecutors, they don't pay personal They don't pay out of their personal pocket. It all comes out of general taxpayer funds and so on. So even they don't suffer any particular negative consequences. If malfeasance was involved in wrongfully putting people in jail, and I was thinking about Daniel, of course, is it 2 years now, 2 years or so that he's been in there. The other aspect which is coming out, which is it's kind of one of these death by 1,000 paper cuts, or this trickling, this, this $17 million in taxpayer money paid out over the last 20 years to resolve violations, some of which, of course, would be sexual in nature, by employees of Congress. So I think it's to be quite fascinating, because why people want to be in politics, I mean, it's always an interesting question to me, because it just seems like such a crap fest. But I wonder, I have this sort of vague thesis that after Bill Clinton was defended by feminists for his protection of Roe v. Wade after his repeated sexual exploitations and harassment of women, I think that was just a big flag saying, if you're a creepy sexual guy, the Democrat Party is the place for you, because as long as you're willing to support abortion and as long as you're willing to support other things that the feminists want, they will create this phalanx around you, like this Wonder Woman shield, I guess a bit more pear-shaped than Wonder Woman, but you will get this shield. The media will shield you, the feminists will shield you, the political power class on the left will shield you. So I think that a lot of people ended up saying, well, if I want to be a creep, being in the Democrat Party is the way to go. And if I really want to be a creep, being a congressman is the way to go, because it's going to be paid for by the taxpayer and it's going to be sealed. And the unsealing of this seems to me kind of job one. How on earth can you vote for people if you have no idea how egregiously they have violated other people's personhood in the most despicable ways? And of course, reporters should be all over this. But of course, the most important thing they're trying to do is figure out, A, how many Diet Cokes Donald Trump drinks a day, and B, how many hours of television he's supposed to watch, rather than, I would suggest, C, finding out who is a serial creep in Congress.
Yes, well, it is exposing so much disingenuousness on the part of self-proclaimed feminists in the media, as well as in the cesspool of the Democrat Party. And, it extends beyond Bill Clinton. I mean, Teddy Kennedy was the original Democrat perv creep, and in a deadly way, too. And it's so the reckoning, that we're having now, all of the second thoughts of all of these enablers now able to take to the pages of the New York Times to say, maybe Ken Starr was right. Right? But, are they doing it because they really actually believe that? Or again, because it's all of the game playing of trying to reclaim the moral high ground, as it were? I don't know. But I will tell you that my own experience in the swamp is what led me in part to move my family away from it. And I'd never had any of the kinds of experiences that we're seeing in the news now. But it is a dirty, grimy, values challenged place. And it doesn't matter if there's a D or an R by the name of most of the denizens who have grown so much moss on their backs. And I think, we haven't gotten the kind of exposure we need of that culture, because people are so much not just of it, but in it, and unable, to take a view from where I live now, 14,000 feet, and see it for what it is and portray it for what it is.
You're such a nice person. Values challenged. Saying that Washington is values challenged is like saying that I'm Mohawk challenged. It's a very, very nice way of putting it. That's very nice. Now, this, I think, also is interesting regarding all of these allegations and what might sort of play out, because I wonder, I've always been kind of confused by this view of there's a rape culture and men are predators and there's this horrible patriarchy that's oppressing and demonizing everyone else and so on. I've never quite understood where this comes from, because I'm a nice guy. All my male friends are nice guys, wouldn't dream of doing anything nasty like this. And it's like, I think I'm starting to understand where some of the leftists are getting this views from, because they seem to be surrounded by extraordinary orc-style creeps. And so to me, mistaking the men who are around you for men as a whole. I mean, I guess if I was surrounded by a phalanx of Harvey Weinstein grabby-fingered clones, I'd probably think that masculinity was kind of toxic to begin with. But you're not saying anything about men as a whole or the patriarchy. You're kind of saying about the people that you're around, the men that you're around, and consequently your own nature. And I think, to me, that's one way of cracking the code as to why it seems that negative patriarchy is so omnipresent for these people, because I think all the men around them are pretty crappy.
Yes. It is the wildest kind of psychological projection. And I have to say, having grown up outside of these power centers in the small rural area in South Jersey, having attended college in a small town outside of Cleveland, and then having lived all over the country, and especially the last more than a decade now in the Rocky Mountain West, most men are not like this. Most of the men that we expose our family and ourselves to are honorable, upright people. And sure, they may come from all parts of the political and ideological spectrum, but they do not do the kinds of things that Harvey Weinstein in his robe, or Charlie Rose in his robe, or Matt Lauer and his various toys in his locked dungeon at 30 Rock did. And these strange swamps and cesspools of predatory men and women who are completely defenseless. That's the other part of the equation that I'd like to get to, too, because when I worked in New York and D.C. and L.A., there was a very noticeable and distinct prototype of female who was willing to do anything and say anything to get ahead. And the idea that someone like Angela Lansbury is not allowed to say out loud that, yes, many times women are culpable for the kinds of things that they say that they are victim of. That's the kind of culture that I was getting away from. And, the types of radical feminists that I met at Oberlin that I now see, inhabiting these newsrooms are so much of the toxic feministy problem, in the public square. And Lena Dunham, by the way, was one of them, an alum of Oberlin College as well.
Yes, with her own accusations as well. It sort of reminds me when I was doing my master's degree, and I was talking to this woman who was quite the feminist, and she was telling me this hair-raising story of how she got a flat on the highway in the middle of nowhere. And don't you know, Michelle, a guy in a pickup truck stopped. And her heart was pounding and she was terrified. She's like, why the heck was I so anti-gun? I'm going to need to defend myself. And she just basically had the story of how this guy in a red baseball cap helped her to change her tire and then drove off. And she said this like it was just astounding, like a statue in Japan came to life. It's like, no, this is pretty common. Oh, you're someone in need. We're going to stop and we're going to help. And it was just like she had discovered a new species of man who was helpful and not predatory. And it's like, I don't know who you've been hanging out with, but that's not as uncommon as you might think.
Yeah. I've marveled at all of the stories of the supposed predators and these journalistic circles, the liberal male journalists who, have always enjoyed that shield, that you were talking about that surrounds Democrat politicians. And, the thing is that, just as we've been talking about with false rape allegations, I think that we're going to know in 12 to 18 months that, possibly half of these allegations turn out to be false. And I would like to know if those liberal male journalists are going to learn something, and I also would like to know if some of them might possibly start to get interested in better reporting on these false allegation stories and policing some of these feminist journalists that I'm telling you about. Sabrina Erdely is not the only one out there who's been let loose to damage men's lives.
Well, I hope that you're right. My skepticism is that it is a lot easier to repeat horrifying allegations than it is to learn how to reason and debate and work from first principles. And I think the kind of people who end up flinging this kind of mud are not the kind of people who end up saying, well, we've got to reevaluate this, because as soon as they say, well, women can lie about these things, as can men, therefore we need to have standards, therefore we can't repeat everything, they lose a very powerful weapon in their arsenal of political dominance. And they then do have to start learning something about political philosophy, reason, evidence, argumentation, and they might lose. And slander is so much easier, unfortunately, in a relatively corrupted culture. Slander is so much easier than reason and evidence that I think you kind of need a different kind of person, which is, again, where, CRTV, what I do, Michelle Malkin investigates, this is where it comes along. I don't know that we can teach them to be like us, but I do hope that people will start listening to us a lot more than them, because I think it might just be an either-or situation. You're either going to go to people who are going to manipulate you or people who are going to inform you. And I think, given the rise of what we're doing and the diminishment of the mainstream media, people are making the wiser choice.
I hope so too. I'm not going to lie and say that I don't have some small amount of Schadenfreude watching so many of these liberals squirm when the weapons are turned and the tables are turned on them. But I do still hold out this ultimate hope that they will learn from their own experiences, having to climb out of the bottom of a pit, the pit of false accusations, and do some good in the world. But until then, yes, I mean, that's what we're about. And, I live this sort of dual existence, because on the one hand, I make my living as a cable news pundit out there pontificating about politics. But for me, especially the last year, has been so edifying to do this kind of investigative work and, to really be able to undertake the search for truth and take people along with me on that journey. It's something that you do every single day, with your videos. And so the work that I'm doing at CRTV really has been the most gratifying work that I've done over the last quarter century.
Oh, Schadenfreude. For breakfast, for lunch, and for dinner. No, it's a beautiful thing. And the one thing I don't have much patience for is when the mainstream media, which they've been liars and bullies because they've had almost unquestioned dominance and power up until the rise of the internet and the alternative media, whenever, that they make their money to a large degree. In the past, they made their money by lying about good people. And now when good people are turning around and telling the truth about the media, suddenly they're appalled and they feel bullied and they're so frail and they're so fragile. And it's like, oh, come on, you cry bullies, suck it up. You've been doing it for about 300 years. It's okay for you to get a tiny taste of your own medicine. After you've been administering poison and we administer medicine, I think you can live with it. So thanks so much for your time today. I look forward to people's comments below. Just wanted to remind people, you got to pick up this book, Sold Out, How High-Tech Billionaires and Bipartisan Beltway Crapweasels Are Screwing America's Best and Brightest Workers. A fascinating expose on the H-1B visa scam and other things which are triggering mass unemployment in America. MichelleMalkin.com, CRTV.com. It's well worth your time. And Michelle, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Stefan. Take care.
All right. Number three way that people are mistaking the future is they do not account for unintended consequences. And this has been a year of unintended consequences, unlooked for consequences. Who among you, not me, but who among you would have said, if Donald Trump is elected, we are going to clear out some of these sex offenders in the media. We are going to clear out these guys who abuse women. Who would have said that? And they're running all these articles about how it's because women felt helpless and traumatized when Trump was elected. It's not. It's because Hillary lost. It is because Hillary lost. We didn't take into account what would happen if Hillary lost. There's an article in the Daily Caller. A woman named Harmit Dillon writes, if President Hillary Clinton ran the country and Bill Clinton were the first gentleman, would we be experiencing this cultural moment recognizing the problem of sexual harassment and with the 2017 Person of the Year at Time magazine be those who spoke out about being harassed? Certainly not. More likely, Harvey Weinstein would be sipping Chardonnay in the Rose Garden and eating canapes while ogling his next victim, while Bill Clinton did the exact same thing. President Hillary Clinton would be smugly presiding over a brittle edifice of equality beneath which lurk decades of enabling, shaming, attacking, suppressing, and silencing the victims. It's so true. I mean, we did not think about this. We did not think about the fact that if Trump was elected, this backlash against people who abuse women, because even though I have said that we should not let ourselves be ginned up and overexcited by this, and it's certainly unfair. I mean, Tavis Smiley, one of the worst hosts on television, is now being attacked. He's now been suspended from PBS for sexual harassment. And I was reading that story, and of course, with these sexual harassment things, you never read past the headline. You see, Tavis Smiley now, sexual harassment, multiple victims. And then when you read it, not so much. People don't like him. Maybe he said some untoward things. I don't think he should lose his job. I think he should lose his job because he's lousy and because PBS hasn't got a single right-wing spokesman on, not one, not even guests, right-wing guests come on their shows. I mean, and this is a public station. There's only one side relentlessly being pushed toward us. So number 4, and I'll stop at number 4, even though I could go on. Number 4 way that people are getting the future wrong is simply misinformation. And this is another bone I have to pick with these Trump skeptic right. They keep saying, hey, the media is on the left. You just have to accept it. That is not right. The media is producing a cloud of misinformation. A recent poll said that 52% of Americans are now saying that the tax bill will raise their taxes. Even the left admits that almost everybody will get a tax cut. Almost everybody will get a tax cut. They even now have cut taxes for higher earners in this final deal. That's what sources say. But just about everybody will get a tax cut, and people don't know it. And why? Because the left isn't going out of their way. It's not that the left is spreading misinformation except through commentators. It's that they're not going out of their way to correct the impression. Believe me, if this were Barack Obama's bill, that's all you would be hearing. No, you silly fellow, you're wrong. It will cut your taxes. Let's take a look at this thing that's happening with the FBI. I don't know how many of you have been following this. They just released the text messages from 2016 from Peter Strzok. He's this guy who was the Zelig of these investigations. He was in the Clinton email investigation. He was demoted from Mueller's team or whatever it is for the look into Trump's Russia connections, which are non-existent. So these are text messages between Peter Strzok and the FBI lawyer, Lisa Page, that he was having an affair with. And that's the first thing I would like to know. Like, why did these guys have so much time to commit adultery? Aren't they supposed to be investigating things? Doesn't investigating things take up your time? Like, when were they adulterating? When were they doing this stuff? All right. So these emails are funny, by the way. If you read them in from my perspective. And what it really looks like is that Strzok was kind of a moderate to liberal Republican, and Lisa Page was an ardent Democrat. And to please her, he keeps going further and further to the left, and he keeps saying terrible, terrible things about Donald Trump. And he's saying F Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is an idiot. I can't believe anybody would vote for Donald Trump. So the media, and this is talking about misinformation, the media is promoting those emails. It's talking about those emails. When I say the media, I mean CNN, I mean the networks. They're promoting those emails, and then they're saying what is quite true is that everybody has political opinions. Everybody can get a little rowdy and express their political opinions with dirty words, never mind. Doesn't mean he can't investigate properly. They're not reporting on the network evening news. They have completely blacked out the following emails, okay? These are texts. I'm sorry, not emails. These are texts where Strzok says to Lisa Page, he says, I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office. Okay, and this is, what's his name? Andrew McCabe, whose wife, remember, received all those, it was a Democrat candidate for state Senate in, I think, Virginia, and she received all these donations from the Clintons, so he had that conflict of interest. He says, I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way Trump gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event that you die before 40. Now, what is like that? What's the insurance? He's saying that in this meeting at Andrew McCabe's office, right, he was the deputy FBI director, Lisa Page put forward a scenario that Trump could never get elected. And he said, I want to believe that. I want to believe in that, but I can't. We can't take that risk. We need an insurance policy. Well, what was that? This is the guy who rewrote the line in the investigation of Hillary Clinton. Instead of saying that she had committed a crime by being grossly negligent, he said that she'd been extremely careless, which is not a crime. He's the guy who made that rewrite, okay? In another exchange the same month, Page forwarded a Trump-related article, and she wrote, maybe you, Strzok, are meant to stay where you are because you're meant to protect the country from that menace. And he says with kind of bravado, of course, I'll try and approach it that way. He says, of course, I'll try and approach it that way. So what's he doing? So here, listen to Jim Jordan. They had Rod Rosenstein from the Justice Department, right? And he's the guy, because Jeff Sessions recused himself, he's the guy who's in charge of the Russia investigation. And Jim Jordan goes after Rod Rosenstein, as he's been doing.
You're the guy in charge. You're the guy who picked Mueller. You're the guy who wrote the memo saying why he needed to fire Comey. You're the guy in charge. You could disband the Mueller special prosecutor, and you can do what we've all called for. Appoint a second special counsel to look into this, to look into Peter Strzok, Bruce Orr, everything else we've learned in the last several weeks.
I don't have Toto's facts.
Yes, Congressman, and I can assure you that I consider it very important to make sure the thorough review is done, and our Inspector General is doing a thorough review. That's how we found those text messages as part of that review.
You've given that answer like 15 times. Let me ask you this. Are you concerned? I mean, this is what a lot of Americans are believing right now, and I certainly do, that the Comey FBI and the Obama Justice Department worked with one campaign to go after the other campaign. That's what everything points to. Think about what we've learned in the last several weeks. We first learned they paid for the dossier. Then we learned about Peter Strzok. And last week we learned about Bruce Orr and his wife, Nellie. I mean, this is unbelievable. So what's it going to take to get a second special counsel to answer these questions and find out, was Peter Strzok really up to what I think he was?
I think it's important to understand, Congressman, we have an Inspector General who has 500 employees and a $100 million budget. And this is what he does. He investigates allegations of misconduct involving department employees. That review that he is conducting is what turned up those text messages. It will also involve interviews of those persons and of other witnesses.
See, this is nonsense. The FBI answers to Congress. The Inspector General, it's great that the Inspector General is doing an investigation, but that's no reason for him to stonewall a congressman. The Congress are your elected officials sent there to go after these guys like people who are not elected to do oversight on them. There's no excuse for saying the Inspector General is investigating this, so I can't speak to Congress. That's absurd. So all this misinformation and all this stonewalling also affects our view of the future. And these are the ways in which, when you're listening to people, listen, I don't know what's going to happen in the midterms. Typically in a midterm, there's a backlash against the party in power. All I'm saying is this: because people got Trump wrong, they can't see how much Trump has gotten right. They cannot see that this year, from January to now, especially if this tax plan passes, has been the best year in government for conservatives. Everything else you hear, women being molested, so don't vote for this guy, Trump colluding with Russia, everything else is about that. It's about power. We are watching a battle for power. That's it. Right now, for this year, Trump has had the power, and it has benefited us. And that's where the morality of this lies. That is where the moral question lies, because the conservative ethos is, in fact, a moral ethos that says that people should be free. I keep saying this again and again. Freedom is the most moral, the most important moral question, because you can't behave morally unless you're free to make choices. And if the government smothers you in every possible way, even including you have to bake a cake against your religious convictions, then you're not free and you can't make those moral choices. So don't be distracted by any of this stuff. It's not about whether Trump's a nice guy. It's not about whether Trump maybe chased a girl around the room at one of his beauty pageants. It's all about power and who has it. And for the last year, we've had it, and it has worked out really, really well.
Oh, hooray, hooray.
The Andrew Klavan Show is produced by Robert Sterling.